Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week we're going to talk about GMuary. Well, I did kind of a Dungeon Minister thing there. So I was called out, as it would be, by Elder Goblin Games. They've got a community project that I think sounds super cool, and I thought I'd get involved. Basically, GMuary is the idea that we want to give space for people who have never run games but that are interested in doing so to do so. And I'll put a link to their video where they talk about how we might do that. In my video, though, I'm going to direct myself to the people that want to run a game for the first time with advice on kind of running your first game and some tips. Make your own adventure. This first part, and I guess maybe the whole video, is going to be a little controversial because I think that a lot of people will say that when you're running for the first time, you should go on to DriveThruRPG or whatever and find a pre-made adventure and run that because it takes a little bit of the burden off of you. But I think pretty much the opposite. I think that the first time you're running a game, you should create your own adventure. And this especially is true for, I think, the people that we're kind of targeting here with GMuary, people that are players already. You're already playing regularly. You have a good grasp of the rule system, or maybe you're going to try a new rule system. But either way, the reason why I think creating your own adventure is best for new GMs is because then you can adapt it on the fly as needed. That is the rulings part of when people say rulings, not rules. It's harder to do when you're doing a published adventure because you are always going to think, what were they thinking here when they put these kobolds in the room, or they put this trap here, or they put this, or the module doesn't say that there's something behind this tapestry, even though maybe it would be a good idea. When you're running it yourself, you can adjust on the fly to make the adventure work. You can fill in the gaps more easily because you understand the entire premise. So that's my little argument for that. And the rest of this video is going to be based on doing your own adventures. So let's just go for it. Find a story you like. Here's the thing. The best advice I could give for creating an adventure is to consume lots of media, whether it be books, comic books, videos, movies, music. And when you consume art, I guess, go to a museum, when you see something that you think is interesting, you note it. And now here's the thing. You don't want to say, I just read this great short story, I'm going to make that short story into an adventure. What you have to do is look at a premise of the short story and say, that's interesting and could be an adventure. We don't want to replicate the story because that would become the railroad, right? We're not going to force our players to do a certain thing, but we can take an idea. So, for instance, I read the story a while back, because if I can think of the name, I'll put it across the screen because I can't think of it off the top of my head. And basically, the premise was that this person had promised this other person that if they got killed in this big battle, they were soldiers, that they would take their money, their month's pay or whatever, and bring it to their family who needed it to survive. And of course, the person dies. So the idea is that they're bringing this money to the family and they made this commitment to do it. Now, obviously, when you involve player characters, you could very simply have them just not do it. But this we'll talk about in a second. The idea, though, that's interesting is you have been tasked to take something to a place, in this case, money, because it's an old friend of yours, or it's somebody who, in this case, they were under them. They were like a private or whatever. The other person was a captain. And you're doing it for honor, whatever, right? So this is the idea. And that's what you like about the story. Now, there might be something else in the story you like. Maybe there's another story where there's a magic sword that was given to somebody from a lady in the lake, or, something to this effect. And instead of making the whole story that, oh, you're the future king or whatever, you can basically just use that part. There is a magic sword that is in this lake. How do we get to it, right? Or how do we convince the fairy in the lake to give it to us? And that's the adventure, right? Take the piece of the adventure that you like, make that the idea, and then everything else kind of flows from it, getting the PCs involved. So there's lots of ways to get the PCs involved in an adventure. And what you want to do is set it up so that they will just naturally fall into the adventure. Or you can set it up, again, I'll talk about the pitch in a little bit, where it's just part of the premise. But there's basically three most obvious ways. One is that they are forced to do it. That is to say, something's happening and they don't have a choice. They are inside of a cave and the cave is collapsing. At the beginning, the adventurer is getting out of the cave. Well, if they don't get out, they're going to die. So of course they're going to do it. You don't have to Or maybe they're prisoners sentenced to death, and if they retrieve this thing, then they'll be able to, be acquitted of the crimes. Or maybe they're forced to do it because of a code of honor or an obligation, right? You are knights that are part of a circle, and you have to bring this thing to this place because it's part of the honor. So motivated would be the second way. Motivated means that there's going to be something in the adventure that's going to entice the PCs to do it. That is to say, it's not so obvious. You're not starting at the door of the dungeon. You are starting in town and finding out about treasure. This can be a little bit trickier to pull off, but depending on your cool idea, this might work a lot better, where you kind of have this idea. And again, the players will play along. What you have to remember when you're running a game is that for the most part, you're running it for people that you know or that are interested in playing a game and that want to have fun. And most people's fun is not destroying your adventure. So, while you could run into some people that could be problematic, hopefully in this first time you're running for your friends, people that are also players with you, it'll be a little easier, and and they're going to take the bait. They will. When they see the map fall out of the person's pocket, right? Or they wake up and all their stuff's been stolen and they see footprints going off into the snow, they're going to follow them, right? They're motivated to do it. They're not forced to. They don't have to. You don't start the adventure going, you must do this. There's something happening at the beginning. Make sure that this motivating factor is relatively short, though. I've seen this be a problem a lot of times. People want to be too soft-footed with this, or soft-footed, the opposite of heavy-handed. But anyways, and they make it too, all of a sudden you're halfway through the session and you still haven't actually figured out what the adventure is. So don't do that, but put something in to motivate the characters to do it. So again, another example might be that you start off and the players are caravan guards. And the very first scene is the caravan's attacked by bandits, and they run off with either people, depending on what kind of characters you're playing, or possibly the treasure, right? And so they're motivated because they want to go get it. They're not forced to. They could always just leave, right? But if they do, then there might be some other consequences. Or obviously, if they just go, we're just going to run away, then, you kind of give that look. You shrug your shoulders and be like, all right, fine, if you're not going to do the adventure. But again, you're not going to have this problem because most people aren't going to do that. So put something in place that will motivate them. The final thing that can be really interesting is if you make it so that the PCs actually create the adventure by something that they did. This one is a little bit trickier to do, but can be really fun if you start the adventure in a way that the PCs are kind of medias res, as they say, so they're already doing something. So here you're kind of doing a little bit of a forced, but that's only almost that's an opening scene. Think of a James Bond movie where there's that little cutscene at the beginning where, okay, you're in the vault, you've broken in and you've got the gem in your hand, right? And then something happens. You take the gem and then you try to sell it, and then all of a sudden the adventure is wrapped around that. Maybe different guilds want it. Maybe you're trying to bring it to places. Maybe it's cursed. All these things can be based on what the PC's action was. And on some level, they should have control of this. In a one-shot, I would make it a little bit more kind of heavy-handed here. But obviously, you don't want to do this in the campaign, where it's they did this thing, and now they are basically going to need to fix it. Either they stole the gem and unwittingly, because they didn't realize that gem was holding a demon, and now this demon has escaped, right? Or they took they robbed this place. They're always thieves, right? Or they saved this person and the person ends up being really evil. And now they have to fight the person, right? They come upon this scene where it seems like they're being the heroes, but in fact, they let a vampire go or something. That's something they created. And, most players are going to want to fix that. So you've got that. They're forced because obligation or the law or whatever. They're motivated because something that happens at the beginning, or they caused it. So they kind of have no choice, but they kind of do. Understand the world. Now, when you're building this quest, what you want to consider is the world. This is more important than anything else because since you're going to almost certainly have to make changes on the fly, you need to know the general idea. How would PCs be accepted in this world, especially if they did a thing, right? Let's say they were criminals and they were going to be executed and they took this thing, to not be, would the townsfolk look at them still and be like, oh, those are the people that did these bad things. We don't want to help them. Would they be afraid of them? How would this affect it? And you don't need to map out every NPC and everybody's name and all that stuff, but you have an idea. How does this civilization think about the things that the PCs are doing and what's going on currently in the world? Are they afraid of the regime that's, in power, that's really oppressing, and the PCs are trying to fight that regime? So maybe they're on the PC side, but they can't do it publicly, right? This is something you just have to kind of think about. Like, what's the world like? So what's the cool idea? How do we get the PCs involved? And what's the world like? The process. So now that you have a cool idea and you have a way that you're going to get the PCs involved, the next step is kind of to get your notes together. I usually do bullet points, the simplest way to do it. Put a main bullet point for some locations, maybe what's there, some motivations of people. Keep your notes brief, but thorough. In an ideal world, we don't want to be referring to the books unless we need to. So that means that if you're going to have, for instance, a hex crawl where they're going to go through a few different areas for wandering monsters, you probably want to note that down in your notes so you're not looking through the wandering monster list. I look at the books all the time when I'm running, but I've also been running for a long time, so I can do it without kind of throwing off the pacing. When you're new, you kind of just want to have everything there. Even if it means you don't have the full selection of monsters, you're just going to pick 3 things that they could run into, that's fine. You don't have to have the full selection. You can even just say, if they run into a wandering monster, I know it's going to be wolves because there's wolves in these woods, and you don't have to roll anything. You can keep it as simple as possible, and your notes should guide you. If something's not in your notes, just kind of go with the flow. Make sure that it makes sense. Make sure that everything's moving forward. You don't want to ever completely throw off a PC's ability by kind of interpreting it wrong. So if somebody says, and again, I've been running a long time, I still do this. If somebody says they're going to use an ability, then you could just say, how does that work? Let them explain it to you. Well, with my move silent, I'm able to sneak past these guards and possibly backstab them if I succeed. Okay, cool. Roll the dice. Maybe you knew what that did, maybe you didn't, but you're going to ask them so they understand what their objective is and how the ability does that. You never want them to just say, I'm going to move silent. Okay, okay, fine, right? But what are you trying to achieve with this? What are you doing here? And the important thing here is to make sure that we keep the pacing. Pacing is the killer of games. When things drag, if things go too fast, if you're not giving enough information, that can make the game kind of feel off. So you want to just, the best way to do it is just get a feel for what the flow, what's happening here. When you're making your notes and you have your 3 or 4 bullet points, make sure that you're moving through them in an order that you think makes sense. If the opening scene is minor and then the ending scene is major, you want to make sure that you're not halfway through the adventure and you haven't got out of the opening scene, right? You want to make sure you leave enough space for the other. So what we want to do is just kind of watch the table as you're going and move through it. Sometimes it's fine just to cut things out. You were going to have multiple guard stations that the PCs were going to have to sneak past, but it took 45 minutes to sneak past the first one. Not in game time, in real time. Just skip the other ones, right? Maybe narrate it. Following that same procedure, you move past the other 4 guards. You know now that there's multiple guard stations, but none of them have seen you, right? Easy as that. You don't have to roll for each one. And on that note, try not to have the PCs roll too much. I find this to be a common fear with new dungeon masters. They don't want to make a mistake, so they'll constantly have people roll. And in the example I just gave you, if you make somebody roll move silent 4 times, even if they have a really high score, they're probably going to fail. So just have them roll once with a penalty if there's a lot of guards, if you want to make it difficult. Start with a one-shot. I didn't straight up say it at the beginning, but I'm going to say it now. If this is your first time running, keep it to a single session. At the end of the session, you'll be able to evaluate what the other players, what people loved, what they thought was maybe a little off, and take that feedback, hopefully positive feedback, and move forward with it. But make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't need to be run in multiple sessions, because if you're new to this, you might end up bleeding into multiple sessions even if you plan a one-shot. So don't plan something epic, plan something simple. And I want to talk just a little bit at the end here, a little bonus, if you will, because I kind of added it to my little notes just before I started to record. There's kind of 3 basic types of quests. So on some level, this comes from video games, and I am not a big video gamer, but I know a lot of video gamers, and when we're playing, sometimes they'll throw these terms out. In the end, most adventures break down into these kind of quests. So I'm just going to kind of run through them so to give you an idea of where you can go with this. Number 1 is a fetch quest. Fetch quest means you're going to get something. There is a magical jewel in this tower, and the PCs want it, need it, are required to get it, whatever. There is a sword at the bottom of the lake. The PCs want to get it. There's just gold in the dungeon. The PCs want to get it. There's a spell that they can cure somebody that they want to help. They got to go get it. That's the fetch quest. You're going someplace to recover something. And it could be guarded by monsters, probably. It could have traps. There could be negotiations. But no matter what, the idea, the whole purpose is that you're going to get this thing. The next kind of quest is the escort quest. This is when you're bringing something somewhere. So you've got the heir to the throne, and you need to bring them to safety because the kingdom is being invaded. You have a golden egg that you need to bring to this wizard so he can cast a spell. You need to bring something, usually something that cannot defend itself, to another place, and something is many things probably, are trying to stop you. You have this, you need to bring it here. That's the escort quest. The basic word guarding a caravan is an escort quest. Now you can start that way, or even kind of tease it that that's what you're doing, and then have something happen where, let's say, I said at the beginning, the caravan's raided, and let's say the guide of the caravan or an important royal person, the son of the king, is kidnapped. Well, now it's a fetch quest, right? Go get him. So there you go. So you can see how it can twist and change, but usually you have a premise. So in your mind, setting up that original idea, you're really setting up a fetch quest, but on the surface, it looks like it's an escort quest, at least at the beginning. And I guess once you get the prince back, you're then escorting them. So there you go. You can have quests within quests. Finally, you've got what I guess is called the kill quest, or this kind of thing. And that's kind of, you just go somewhere to slay something. So there is a dragon that has been tormenting the town. There is an ogre that's eating people. There's a troll under the bridge. There is something that you need to destroy. It could be any number of monsters. It could be an entire army, depending on the way this thing's set up. But basically, you're going someplace to kill something. And this is probably one of the easiest types of things to pitch, and probably one of the easiest ones to run. Effectively, there is something bad, and the play pieces have to get rid of it. People have been going missing, and there's a monster in the woods. Go figure out what it is and kill it, right? Nice and simple. That's a really fun, easy type of adventure to lay out that has many, many open directions the pieces can go in, lots of freedom and lots of fun, right? And that's one of those kind of ones too that you can really control the pacing pretty easy. So a kill quest might be a good one to start with because it's real simple, right? Simple is better. And finally, I just want to talk about one last thing, the pitch. To tie this all together, and the most important part of any of this is how you pitch the adventure. If you are running a one-shot, you should give as much information about the basic concept of the world, what might be going on in the adventure before the session, before people build their characters. If your idea is you are prisoners sentenced to death and you're going to start the adventure in front of the queen who's going to say, I need you to go on this covert mission. You're basically expendable, but if you get this back for me, I will pardon you. You have 3 days. If you don't return my thing, then I'm going to send the guards out to kill you. If that's the case, that should be part of the pitch. So that when the people make their characters, you don't have the lawful good paladin that's expecting to be wearing full plate armor and have a horse going, hold on, what? Or the person that's like, I'm not going to do that for you because I don't believe in wealth, or I don't care because I can't be killed because I'm immortal, whatever. You want people to make characters that will work with your adventure. And the best way to do that is to pitch it as best as possible. I know that on the surface, it seems like it's a good idea to have surprises, but really you want them to make the right kind of characters. So again, going back to our caravan, you can pitch. You are taking the young prince across a dangerous wood on a caravan to get them to safety. Players will make the right kind of characters to do that. Then if the prince is kidnapped, they will do the fetch quest because the right kind of characters would do that. They wouldn't just say, well, too bad, right? Because they have been brought very specialized to help this situation. So the pitch is really key. If you're going to run a game and you want it to go successfully, you want to make sure people know what they're getting into. Because if they're getting into this and then they turn around and say, well, we're not going to chase him down, then it's easy enough to say literally out of game and say, your characters were hired to bring him to safety. You agreed to that. So what are you going to do? And people will realize, okay, yeah, that's what I got to do. So, sometimes people get all nervous about their characters, even though they're just pieces of paper. But, such is life. In any case, hopefully this was helpful. Check out that Elder Goblin Games video. I'll put a link. Check out my description below. You're going to find a link to my Patreon if you want to support the channel, Discord to join the conversation. And I'll talk to you soon.